Damien Caldwell didn't fear boardrooms, billion-dollar negotiations, or volatile markets. What truly unsettled him was a question that echoed during every family gathering. Why are you still single? As the family prepared a grand celebration for his grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, Damien braced himself, not for the champagne toasts or sentimental speeches, but for the sharp glances and not-so-subtle nudges. There's something uniquely exhausting about being successful in everything except love.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Let's get to the rest of the story.
His mind, trained for logic and efficiency, treated the problem like any other corporate hurdle. If the issue was public scrutiny, the solution was to create an image, one they couldn't question. So, he decided to hire a woman to play the role of his wife. It wasn't romance, it was strategy. What Damien didn't calculate was the weight that comes with pretending your emotional story is real. Growing up, he watched his grandparents dance in the kitchen, argue softly over crossword puzzles, and fall asleep holding hands. To everyone else, their 50th anniversary was a party. To Damien, it was a mirror he tried not to look into. While his achievements stacked sky high, his heart lived quietly in a safe he never dared unlock. Pretending to be in love, even temporarily, would force him closer to feelings he kept sealed. The family estate in Michigan was buzzing with caterers, florists, and distant cousins flying in. Damien knew the spotlight would be intense. His relationship status was practically a family sport. And the worst part? No matter how polished his answers were, they always fell flat. The emotional story of a man too busy for love never moved anyone. It just left an awkward silence. He scrolled through profiles sent by the agency, eyes skimming through photos and bios like he was hiring a personal assistant. He didn't want someone beautiful, witty, or even likable, just someone who could follow a script. But fate has a way of ignoring instructions. When he landed on one profile, something pulled at him. Her smile wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that stirred something deeper than he wanted to admit. Hiring a fake wife wasn't romantic. It was calculated damage control, a firewall for emotions Damien wasn't ready to confront. But something about this plan, it didn't feel sterile like his usual decisions. It felt risky, and risk, when it touches the heart, doesn't obey rules. In the back of his mind, a whisper formed. What if pretending doesn't stay pretend? As the plane descended toward Chicago, Damien rehearsed lines like a CEO prepping for a pitch. His assistant had handled the details, the logistics, the NDA. Everything was buttoned up, everything except his chest, which tightened with an unease he couldn't rationalize. What he didn't know was that the woman stepping into his plan had a real story of her own, a touching story waiting to collide with his. Emily Rivera stared at the eviction notice taped to her bookstore's wooden door, the ink smudged by morning rain. Every book on her shelves told a story of survival, but hers was hanging by a thread. Her rent had doubled, customers had dwindled, and her savings were dissolving. Then came the offer, $15,000 to play the wife of a man she'd never met. It sounded absurd, even dangerous, but so did losing everything she'd built. She hesitated, heart torn between dignity and desperation. Emily wasn't the kind of woman to sell herself, but this wasn't romance, it was theater. And if one weekend of pretending could save her life's dream, wasn't it worth the gamble? Her emotional story wasn't glamorous, but it was real, carved into every invoice, every skipped lunch, every night sleeping behind the register. Sometimes, surviving means making choices that bruise your pride. The agency interview was clinical, like auditioning for a role in someone else's fairy tale. Emily played along, answering questions about her husband, reciting backstories they wrote together. Her voice shook, not from nerves, but from the strange intimacy of it all. Being someone's fake wife sounded so far from her real life, yet oddly familiar, like a plot from one of her graphic novels. This was no longer just a job. It was an emotional gamble. The contract was thick, filled with fine print and ironclad clauses. She signed it anyway, the pen trembling between her fingers. Not for the money, but for hope. Hope that this bizarre arrangement would grant her more than a weekend reprieve. Touching stories don't always begin in joy. Some start in desperation, in deals we never imagined making. Emily didn't know if she was stepping into salvation or into something worse. The morning she packed her suitcase, she stood for a long time staring at her sketch pad. She slid it into her bag last, just in case. It had always been her safety net, her silent companion. As she zipped up the bag, she whispered a prayer, not for love, but for peace. She just needed things to stop falling apart. Her friends wouldn't understand, so she didn't tell them. Not about the money, not about the role. She rehearsed her new identity quietly on the train, adjusting her tone, practicing her smile. Every stop took her closer to a man she didn't know, but whose problems, ironically, mirrored her own. Maybe, just maybe, they were two broken stories about to find the same page. When the train pulled into Chicago, Emily stepped onto the platform, not as herself, but as someone's wife. Her heartbeat pounded like a drum. She didn't expect romance, but she hoped the man waiting for her wasn't cold or cruel. Little did she know, her real story was just beginning, and it would change both their lives. Emily expected a penthouse dripping in ego, gold accents, cold silence, and a man with an overinflated sense of self. What she found instead was subtle elegance, warm light, and Damien Caldwell reading in silence. He stood when she entered, his movements careful, as though he didn't want to startle her. And when their eyes met, something wordless passed between them. Not attraction, curiosity. She spoke first, a nervous joke about meeting her husband. He laughed, not out of politeness, but surprise. The tension softened, replaced by an odd sense of comfort. Damien offered tea, not champagne. Emily declined with a grin, already feeling less like a prop and more like a guest. Sometimes, emotional stories begin with silence, and in that silence, we listen deeper. Their chemistry wasn't explosive, it simmered. Damien asked questions no client ever asked her before. Not about her performance, but her passions. He noticed the ink on her fingers and asked what she liked to draw. Emily, in turn, saw through his practiced charm and found a man hungry for something real. The line between acting and being blurred faster than either expected. As they sat rehearsing their backstory, the details flowed too easily. Their How We Met tale started off as fiction, but with each word, it began to feel familiar. Shared laughs became genuine. A moment where she brushed his arm didn't feel like rehearsal. It lingered. Damien noticed the small scar on her wrist. Emily saw the faint wrinkle in his smile. They were studying each other without realizing it. By the second hour, Emily stopped checking the clock. Damien wasn't the arrogant CEO she feared. He was calm, thoughtful, even funny. She felt safe, which scared her more than feeling judged. When he complimented her voice, she blushed. When she asked about his favorite book, he answered like a boy remembering his first adventure. In their pretend world, something real was blooming. They didn't kiss or even touch more than hands, but the air between them had changed. Emily caught herself hoping the weekend wouldn't end too soon. Damien, quietly, wondered why this woman who barely knew him could disarm his defenses so easily. It wasn't just performance anymore. It was a touching story writing itself in real time. As they ended the night rehearsing their first dance, neither of them laughed. They just moved slowly, music playing softly in the background. It was supposed to be acting, but acting doesn't leave a lump in your throat. The next day, they'd face the crowd together. But tonight, they faced each other. The estate by Lake Michigan was breathtaking, with ivy-covered walls and candles floating in glass bowls. Guests arrived in black-tie glamour, champagne flowed, and a string quartet played timeless love songs. Emily slipped her hand into Damien's as they stepped into the ballroom. A photo was snapped, their first official moment. But neither expected the warmth in their palms to feel so real. Emily smiled as strangers complimented their love. Damien introduced her to his grandmother, who hugged Emily tightly and whispered, "He finally found someone gentle." Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was an emotional story unraveling in every room, except it wasn't fiction anymore. Their act was too natural, too synchronized. They danced like they'd done it before. They laughed at inside jokes that weren't scripted. Every shared glance stretched a string between them, pulling tighter with every moment. Damien watched Emily light up around his family, her charm effortless. He caught himself staring at her hands, her eyes, the way she listened. It terrified him how much he wanted it to be real. Emily saw Damien let his guard down. He joked with his cousins, helped his niece tie her shoes, and cried quietly during his grandfather's speech. This wasn't the man she read about in Forbes. This was someone kind, someone lonely, someone trying to matter beyond his net worth. She wasn't just acting anymore. She was seeing. As the weekend unfolded, they found excuses to linger by the lake, to walk slower through the gardens, to talk longer by the fire. Touches grew frequent, her hand on his back, his fingers brushing her hair. Damien no longer cared about keeping up appearances, and Emily no longer remembered where the lie ended. Each guest comment, each toast, each moment became harder to navigate, because pretending started to feel like memory. Their emotional story wasn't just touching stories told to strangers. It was something neither of them could explain. And the scariest part? They didn't want it to stop. But fairy tales don't stay uninterrupted. And just as Damien began to believe in the possibility of something real, a shadow from his past stepped into the light, eyes sharp, heart bitter. She saw through it all, and she wasn't going to stay silent. Vanessa arrived in a red dress, dramatic as ever, her heels clicking like accusations on marble. She smiled too wide, hugged too hard, and eyed Emily like a bloodhound. Damien felt his chest tighten. He knew that look. Vanessa had never been one to let go quietly. And this time, she smelled something off. Emily felt the tension, even before Vanessa cornered her by the dessert table. "You're an illustrator, right? Not a CEO's wife." The words were a dagger wrapped in velvet. Emily fumbled, her smile cracking. Damien rushed to intervene, but Vanessa had already lit the match. The confrontation wasn't coming. It had begun. The night reached its climax in the main hall, as Vanessa raised her glass and outed the lie to the room. Gasps echoed. Damien froze. His family looked confused, hurt, betrayed. Emily turned to leave, but Damien held her hand. And then, the impossible happened. He stepped forward, not to lie, but to tell the truth. He confessed everything, how it started, what it was meant to be, and what it had become. He spoke not to defend the lie, but to reveal the love. "I hired her," he said, "but I fell in love with her for real." There was silence, then a few teary smiles, some applause. Others walked out, but Emily stayed. She wasn't sure what hurt more, being outed or hearing the truth in front of everyone. But when Damien looked at her, eyes filled with fear and longing, she saw it. He meant it. It wasn't a performance. He was choosing her with no script, no contract, just heart. And that made all the difference. Vanessa left, but the damage remained. Whispers, tension, doubt. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Damien didn't knock on her door. They were both raw, cracked open by the fallout. Yet somewhere, between the shame and the hope, something stronger took root. A real story not born of lies, but of choice. The weekend ended without fireworks. No perfect goodbye, just a glance across the garden, a silent promise hanging in the air. Emily boarded her train, unsure if Damien would ever call. But love, when real, finds its way back, often not with grand gestures, but with quiet steps. Days later, as the bookstore bell rang, Emily looked up and froze. Damien stood there, not in a suit, but in jeans, holding a toolbox. He didn't speak at first. He just smiled and walked to the broken shelf by the window, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. Action spoke louder than any apology. She watched him hammer gently, fix the alignment, clean up the dust. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but I want to build something with you." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with sincerity. It wasn't about fixing a shelf. It was about mending trust. Damien didn't offer her money. He offered partnership, supporting her dream, not saving her. Emily, stunned, didn't know what to say. So, she handed him her sketch pad. "You can't buy your way in," she said. But you could draw something if you want to stay. That moment said everything. They didn't rush. They rebuilt, slowly, intentionally. Breakfasts turned into afternoons. Sketches became collaborations. Damien learned about ink, texture, paperweights. Emily learned about leadership, patience, and grace. Their emotional story had no wedding cake or paparazzi, just two people choosing each other every day. Word spread. The bookstore became a haven of love, of art, of healing. Customers returned, drawn by the story behind the pages. Some called it one of those touching stories people tell their kids. Others just called it a miracle. For Damien and Emily, it was simply their truth. He still ran companies. She still drew comics. But they shared something now, something unshakable. Born from fiction, shaped by risk, and sealed by choice. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And in a world of noise and pretense, that's rare. And just like that, their story, an emotional story that began with a lie, became a real story told by thousands. But for them, it was never about the story. It was always about the love. What would you do if pretending to love someone suddenly felt more real than anything you've ever known? Would you run? Or take the risk of losing everything just to find something true? Damien thought he could fake it. Emily thought she had nothing left to lose. But both discovered a truth most people never dare chase. Love doesn't follow contracts. It rewrites them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever found something real in the most unexpected way? Do you believe a relationship that starts as a lie can become something genuine? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this emotional story moved you, if you felt even a little spark watching their real story unfold, then don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next touching stories we're about to reveal. Who knows? The next one might feel like it was written just for you.